Okay, now let's shift gears a little bit. Now that we have a plan for how we're going to roll it out, so we have some kind of structure and organization about introducing it into our operating room, now we can think about how we want to display the checklist in the operating room. In the small-scale testing phase, which is where we've been up until now, nearly everybody keeps the checklist on paper. Not everybody. Some people may already have posters that they're trying out in their operating rooms. But most people stay with paper. And as we've suggested before, a way to make the paper work is to hold the checklist up in front of the clinician. Again, one of the things I want to emphasize to everybody is a well-done checklist is one that's read off of something. When you're beginning to do this work and the whole time you do it, you do not want people riffing off the checklist. You do not want somebody to get up there and recite from memory what needs to come off of a piece of paper. And why is that? Well, if you start to recite from memory, then the whole purpose of, or not the entire purpose, but part of the purpose of using the checklist is because sometimes our memories fail us and we leave steps out. The checklist should be read. It needs to be read. It needs to be read in the beginning, and it needs to be read all the way through, just like we expect our pilots to read the checklist in the cockpits of the airplanes that we fly on. Now, as we move into this phase of the work, you can see there some of the different ways that we could introduce the checklist itself to the operating room. A lot of hospitals use the checklist poster. One of the things I would encourage you to think about is where you put it in the room. Is it in a place where people can actually see it to read from it? And is the writing that's on the checklist big enough for people to actually read? Because if you can't read it from the operative field, nobody's going to read it. So if you're going to use a poster and put it up in your operating rooms, which is a great idea, it needs to be big enough so that the surgeon and the scrub nurse and the circulator and the tech and the anesthesiologist can actually read it wherever you post it. Now, we've walked into operating rooms in some hospitals where the checklist was so far away that no one could possibly read it, and then it isn't going to be used as it's intended. You can put it in the electronic medical record. Many hospitals have taken that route of putting it in the EMR. That is a way to do it, as long as you don't let the electronic medical record turn it into a nursing task. So that the greatest value of having it in an EMR is to keep track of what you're doing and what you're not doing, the documentation side, but the actual performance of the checklist itself needs to be read. So if that means having somebody read it out of the EMR, then that's what you ought to do. The last thing you want is to have a checklist converted into an EMR that then the only person who sees it or hears it or checks off any of the tasks is a circulating nurse. It doesn't do what the checklist is all about, which is about creating that conversation, passing information that might not get passed otherwise, making sure that we do all the things that we're supposed to, engaging all of the members of the team. If the circulator sits in front of a computer screen in silence, checking boxes, the only thing you will have accomplished in all likelihood will have been to have documented that the boxes got checked, not even necessarily that the tasks got accomplished. And how do I know that? I know that because we've heard from other hospitals and seen in other hospitals that the checklist could actually be checked off in the EMR before the patient came in the room, or filled out for documentation purposes 2 hours later. If that's the case, you're clearly not doing what you want to do. Great documentation, but the end effect for the patient isn't what you want it to be. And then finally, using the checklist on paper. As I said, the advantage of the paper is it's very easy to modify. All you have to do is change it and print out some new copies in order to make your modifications. And a lot of hospitals have used that technique to stay flexible in the early part of their rollout work. The trick to it is that somebody needs to hold it up so that the people who are going to participate in the checklist can read it from the field. That absolutely can be done. It absolutely can be done without compromising sterility by people who already know what their jobs are. The paper can work if you can't do the posters. The posters are hard to change and cost more money, so a lot of people stick with paper in the very beginning. Waiting for the posters is not a reason to delay the next phase of the work if you're otherwise ready.